We've missed a couple of generations of Toyota's Camry model line, but the brand felt it needed reviving, hence the return of this contender to our market. In 8th generation form it is, as before, a big, comfortable saloon, but this time it champions self-charging hybrid technology.
Unless you're American or a student of automotive branding, it's really quite likely that you'll have never heard of a Toyota Camry, yet it is one of the world's best-selling model lines, and this, the 8th generation version, is back in our market. Recently, Toyota has been making a habit of reintroducing its best-selling nameplates back into Europe. First there was the return of the Corolla, and now the Camry name is with us once more too. As before, it adorns the boot lid of a Mondeo-sized saloon, but this time there's full hybrid power of the self-charging variety beneath the bonnet, and that will be this Toyota's biggest selling point. We'll get to that after the history bit. Over 19 million Camrys have been sold globally since the first generation version of this car arrived way back in 1982, most of them in the US, where over 400,000 Camrys are sold each year. Today this car is sold in more than 100 countries around the world, and with such a global product you'd expect a wide variance of packaging. And sure enough, over the years there have been narrow and there have been wide body models, there have been saloons and estates, there have been badge engineered variants like the Daihatsu Altis and the Holden Apollo for certain countries, and different branding for the Japanese market, where this car has also been marketed with Grazia and Vista badging. Europe, though, has never had much of a taste for this model line, and the car was discontinued in the UK back in 2004, primarily because of Toyota's inability at that time to offer a diesel option. So it is a touch ironic that the demise of diesel has led to its return now as a self-charging petrol-electric hybrid, which shares most of its engineering with the more image-conscious Lexus ES. That Lexus rolls down the same US Kentucky production line as this XV70 series 8th generation Camry, although the ES is a different kind of car. It's designed for the premium, full-sized executive segment, where it competes against models like the BMW 5 Series, the Mercedes E-Class and the Audi A6. In contrast, this Camry, although it's similarly sized, is price-pitched at the more mainstream medium-range market, dominated by volume brands with cars like Mondeos, Passats and Insignias. People buying these sorts of cars now often want to switch away from diesel and get something that's rather more in keeping with the current eco-zeitgeist. If you're of that mindset and you've taken a look around that medium sector, well, then you might find yourself less than enamoured with a Mondeo hybrid, and also reckon that something like a plug-in Passat is too pricey, in which case a Camry might suit you perfectly. Well, that's Toyota's thinking anyway. It fits into the widest range of hybrid models offered by any manufacturer in the industry. The Yaris, 3 shapes of Corolla, the CHR, the RAV4 and 3 Priuses. And so it should perfectly complement current consumer preferences, in theory anyway. How might this car suit you in practice though? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Not everyone wants to turn heads as they drive. Toyota Camry owners certainly don't. It's been written that this would be the perfect car for a private detective, visually unremarkable and utterly forgettable. That is maybe a touch unfair. From certain angles, the current car has some appeal, but it would still be a perfect choice as a base for a stakeout that would blend seamlessly into the urban streetscape. North America is full of big, comfy and rather bland saloons just like this one, cruising the interstates and queuing for the drive-through at Dunkin' Donuts. But why on earth would you want to buy such a thing here? Well, quite a few reasons actually, if the model that you have in mind is indeed a Camry. The attributes that sold this car in respectable numbers in our market back in the 80s and the 90s still remain. Value, comfort, lots of kit, a huge boot and a spacious cabin. But with this 8th generation car, these things have been joined by a selling point of perhaps more current substance, a 2.5 litre self-charging hybrid engine that Toyota reckons could allow you to complete up to half of your daily commute on battery power alone. and without the faff of having to plug in. Add to this the news that this XV70 series model shares virtually all of its basic engineering with a Lexus ES costing 30% more, and you begin to understand why the Japanese brand decided that the proposition on offer here was strong enough to return the Camry to our market after a 15-year absence. It'll still only suit a very specific kind of buyer, but that's okay because the brand won't be importing very many here anyway. The rather select group of customers who end up with one will be attracted by the idea of owning one of the world's most reliable cars, and that's something evidenced by the fact that in the US, Camrys are regularly passed down through family and friends rather than being sold on. And a potential buyer will have almost no interest in handling dynamics, except of course to the extent of their influence on ride and refinement. Both those things remain strong points here, although of course when it came to noise suppression, the petrol-electric dynamic force power plant up front gave Toyota something of a head start. It's the same engine that wafts the current RAV4 about, a normally aspirated power plant that runs with both direct and indirect injection, uses the efficient Atkinson cycle, and is paired to a clever epicyclic geared hybrid system. Here, this complicated power plant seems even more unobtrusive, and that's thanks to enormous efforts made in insulating the cabin and the bonnet, reducing vibrations from the underfloor, and addressing areas of potential wind noise across the sleeker bodywork. And those are efforts which have been extremely effective. If your spend on a big sedan has to be limited to less than £50,000, then there can be few more refined ways to travel. Provided you're not in a hurry, of course. If you are, and you plant your right foot down on the throttle for, say, a quick overtake, the engine flares in alarm as the CVT auto gearbox sends the revs soaring without much accompaniment in terms of rapid forward motion. Initially, this is frustrating until you realise that a different kind of driving style is required here. You don't make a hybrid engine go quickly by ramming your foot to the floor, but by backing off the throttle between ratios in a way that lets the revs drop and lets the engine bite into its torque curve. Once you understand this, things improve, and they get better still once you realise that the initially rather dead feel that you get when you're pushing on the accelerator can be mitigated by fiddling with mode buttons by the gear lever that include a sport setting as well as the ordinary, normal and eco options. These tweak steering and throttle feel along with gear change response, plus you can shift the auto gear lever into a plus and minus zone in the extremely unlikely happenstance that you decide to take control of the virtual ratios yourself. There aren't any steering column mounted gear change paddles. It is rather debatable whether a typical Camry driver would know what to do with those anyway, but if you can be bothered to activate the sport mode, you'll find that the 2.5 litre VVT-i engine gathers itself together with a bit more enthusiasm. That reminds you that this unit does in fact marshal quite a few braked horses, 176 bhp to be precise, with a further slug of power provided by an electric motor mounted on the front axle that boosts total output to 215 bhp. That's enough to allow this car to reach 62 from rest surprisingly rapidly in just 8.3 seconds. For reference, that is nearly a second faster than its only really direct segment rival, the Ford Mondeo hybrid. You can't raise your hopes too high in this regard, of course. As usual with hybrids, mid-range torque is pretty terrible. The 221 Nm figure is about 40% less than the kind of pulling power that you get from a comparable 2-litre diesel. And should autobahn motoring be on the agenda, you'll find yourself frequently having to give up your place in that fast lane. And that's thanks to a maximum speed that's limited to just 112 miles an hour. But hey, look at what this model can give you. A potential NEDC rated CO2 figure of around 100 grams per kilometre and a frequently achievable combined cycle WLTP fuel consumption return that's somewhere in the 50s on green pump fuel. Give it a break. Like all Toyota and Lexus hybrids, this Camry can be driven in three ways. The first of these, from start off, sees forward motion by electric power only, even if you don't select the provided EV mode, and milk float mobility, still powered by an old-tech nickel metal hydride battery, is supposed to be possible for up to 1.2 miles, although in practice the engine almost always quickly cuts in, unless you're merely creeping around in a car park. The other two motive formats see this car either using just its engine, that's if you're giving it full throttle, or more usually delivering the normal hybrid combination of petrol power and electrified motion, which of course is primarily how the powertrain is designed to operate. During deceleration and under braking, the engine switches off and both electric motors act as high output generators, recovering kinetic energy which automatically recharges the batteries for the next time that the hybrid system is able to switch back into electric only mode. Hence the way that so much of urban motoring in this Camry can be conducted without the use of fossil fuel. So the technology works from an efficiency point of view anyway, or at least it will if you work with the technology and drive accordingly. Now that requires understanding of the power meter, which as usual on a hybrid Toyota replaces the rev counter on the left hand side of the instrument binnacle. Drive on a light throttle and you'll keep its needle between 9 and 12 o'clock, that's in the eco section. Push on a little further with your right foot and the said needle will turn beyond midday into the gauge's thirstier power section, and that reminds you primly that the polar ice cap is melting even as you drive. Lift off or brake with a little rainforest restraint and the needle swings back between 8 and 9 o'clock into the charging mode. You can see that the difference all of this makes rather more graphically by selecting an energy monitor display which shows either alongside this dial in the instrument binnacle or more colourfully over there on the centre dash screen. Of course, it's possible that there might be times when it's necessary to set frugality aside and to push on a little through the corners, at which point you'll discover a mild disapproval from your Camry, but a willingness to work with you until normal cruisy service can be comfortably resumed. This 8th generation model's much stiffer GAK chassis helps a lot here, and Toyota also claims to have done a lot to improve the electric steering, although in terms of feel it's still way off the kind of thing that you'd find in a decent European rival. Ride quality, as mentioned earlier, is compliant, although that's not due to the inclusion of modern multi-link independent suspension, but rather because Toyota has been able to refine its older tech setup without the need for it to facilitate sporty handling of any kind. Now, we could tell you what they've done, but it's too boring to bother with. You might like to know about some of this car's other built-in technology though, the helpful ones anyway. An auto glide feature, for instance, which allows the car to decelerate more slowly in normal driving. Now that's useful because the brakes, which as we referenced earlier, mix friction and recharging retardation, can sometimes be a bit grabby. Auto glide control makes this tendency rather less noticeable, and it becomes effective in situations like, for instance, when you're coasting with your foot off the accelerator pedal towards a stoplight. You'd think a bit of semi-autonomous camera technology might suit this car too, but the closest that this Camry gets to that is an adaptive cruise control system that manages affairs on the highway and can pretty much drive the car for you in traffic jams at speeds of up to 25 miles an hour. That's standard, as are the usual Toyota safety sense features operated by both the forward-facing camera and a millimetre wave radar, which, like virtually everything else about this sedan, will please its primary American customers. Satisfying a European audience though, well, it'll be more challenging, but with just 500 examples of this model coming here each year, Toyota really doesn't have to try too hard in that regard. If it had, then perhaps this car would be a rather different thing. Better perhaps, but less of a Camry. And a great many global buyers would think that to be rather a pity. Come on, be honest, you expected this Camry to look rather bland. Plenty of this 8th generation model's predecessors certainly did. And we'll be frank, so did we. Instead, what we're served up here is reasonably distinctive. That won't have the neighbours peering over the hedge to see what you've bought, but there's certainly an appealingly low-set look, and that's aided by short overhangs and a wide, purposeful stance. Suffice to say, if this car was Lexus badged, you wouldn't do a double take. Of course, in many ways, it is very much a Lexus underneath. We'll get to that. There's something hinted at in profile by the rather premium pavement stance. That has a lot to do with the way the relatively low bonnet and roofline combine with this lower set mid-level crease that runs through the door handles. The idea apparently was to give the appearance of the cabin being pulled down into the body of the car, delivering the impression of a lower centre of gravity. A rising diagonal line from the front wing right back into the rear haunches is there to give the flanks some shape, and it separates lightly flared arches housing rims that are either 17 or, as here, 18 inches in size, depending on whether you've opted for design or top XL trim. We only get this saloon body style. Back in the 90s there was a Camry estate, but there are no plans for that version's return. The front-end finishing that Toyota has chosen for European market versions of this car isn't as appealing as the nose this car wears in some other global markets. Google around and you'll see what we mean, mainly because of the addition of this curious ribbed grey plastic panel that dominates the whole of the front lower section. Now, the brand reckons that this appendage adds impact, prestige and a more ground-hugging look. Well, you be the judge. It's framed nicely, though. The bumper corners sandwich the lower grille in a shape that's supposed to be reminiscent of the twin hulls of a catamaran. Further up, full LED headlamps flow into a narrow, wide upper grille. This XV70 series 8th generation Camry is a fraction larger than the Mondeo segment norm. Compared to that Ford, it's actually 14mm longer with 12mm more width. The wide stance in particular is something that's especially apparent here at the back. A lot of thought's gone in here that isn't immediately apparent. The subtle boot edge that acts as a spoiler lip and aero-stabilising fins that are designed into the sides of these LED rear combination lamps. They're supposed to aid high-speed handling stability. Of course, as usual, what's more important is the stuff that you can't see, primarily the all-new, stiff, lightweight GAK platform introduced with this 8th generation model, which is 30% more rigid than anything Toyota has previously used for this size of car. It's essentially the same as a chassis that features in this model's close cousin and production stablemate, the Lexus ES. Although that car is fashioned from lighter high-tensile steel, it features aluminium for the bonnet and for the wings, and it has extra chassis bracing and additional soundproofing. Time to take a seat inside. Now, like all this Camry's opening panels, the door does feel a little light and lacking in heft. And it shuts with a small shudder to leave you in a typical middle-class American auto environment, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This cabin's spacious, it's plush and it's well-equipped, and if those are your priorities, then you'll like it just fine. A little of the blandness that we expected from the exterior styling does manifest itself here, but Toyota has done its best to add a bit of interest with this slanting satin metallic frame design for the upper part of the centre stack, trimmed in shiny piano black. Leather upholstery is a given, as are heated and power adjustable seats. This is a car designed for the American market after all, and there's certainly plenty of room for you to stretch out width-wise if you're one of those stateside folk who is frequently acquainted with the offerings of Colonel Sanders. This top XL variant gains the dubious addition of what might very well be the most divisive piece of interior trimming we've seen in a very long time. These so-called tiger eye inlays applied around the lower centre console and the passenger-facing sections of the fascia. Now, we're told that these bizarre bronze-hued fittings have a shine and depth that changes with the viewing angle like a tiger's eye gemstone. all that we can say is that this kind of finishing just wouldn't last 5 minutes in any European car maker's design studio. But then, after all, this is not a model designed with European preferences in mind, is it? As is very evident not only from the acres of elephant grey plastic that decorates the cabin here, but also from a look at the infotainment provision on offer. The centre dash Toyota Touch 2 with Go multimedia and navigation screen offers a sort of size, 7 inches and 2D graphics. It would have been current 5 or 6 years back, but now feel distinctly yesteryear. That being the case, there is of course no sign of the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring. The most similarly sized models this side of the pond have long since standardised. Toyota has an older tech MirrorLink Mirrorcast system. There is also the issue that the screen's resolution isn't especially impressive, and also that its glossy surface attracts the sun, and that makes it sometimes rather difficult to read on the move. This Toyota Touch setup claims to have advanced voice recognition, but it isn't very advanced because it can't find you a radio station, it can't adjust the cabin temperature, or do much else that the most modern speech systems now deliver in cars of this kind. You can tell it to input sat-nav destinations or make phone calls though. On the plus side, this setup does include a standard reversing camera, as well as all the usual DAB audio, Bluetooth and audio streaming features. Plus, its info section's energy monitor is still a benchmark for other brands in showing how real-time hybrid functionality can be clearly depicted to the driver. Little touches like that make a lot of difference. Here's another, the climate system. Dual zone climate control you would expect in this class of car, but this setup is rather cleverer than the norm. That's thanks to the use of nanotechnology, an air purifying system that operates automatically when the ventilation is switched on. Now this releases nanoparticles, negatively charged ions wrapped in water molecules into the cabin through the driver's side dashboard vent. Now the nano moisture content is approximately 1,000 times that of conventional ions, and because the particles have mildly acidic properties, they're said to have a gently moisturising effect on skin and hair while creating a crisp and more refreshing cabin atmosphere. Another thing that we think you'll like is the seating design. Now, the stitched hide used here isn't of the finest quality, but over long mileages in this car, we found that the orthopaedic structure beneath more than compensates. Now, Toyota is aware that a typical Camry driver will be covering considerable mileage over his or her period of ownership, and the brand has designed these enveloping front chairs to suit. Each has a wide shoulder area, providing the kind of lateral support that's more commonly found in sports cars, with rigid cushion springs designed to better keep the occupant's posture in place while cornering. Careful design of the seat base here. The seat back springs have been moved forward to allow for a more comfortable posture, and a thick urethane pad supports your lower spine. That's all designed to put less stress on the lower back and muscles. Combine that with the fact that lumbar support is standard, that's a feature that appallingly most European brands will charge more for, and you have a recipe for long distance journey and comfort that'll really endear a typical Camry buyer to this car, and understandably so. All-round visibility is excellent, aided by a slightly high-set driving position, so you won't often find yourself needing the rear-view camera or the standard all-round parking sensors. And the power-folding heated mirrors have clever rain-repellent glass. There's also very little to fault about the driving position. That's thanks to vast amounts of seat and steering wheel adjustment. Now, there's 260 millimetres of back and forth seat slide movement, for example. Given the comments that we made about the infotainment system earlier, you won't be expecting any kind of digital instrument dash to feature in the instrument cluster that you view through this three-spoke leather-stitched wheel. And sure enough, the layout is conventional. It's a couple of analogue gauges separated by a 7-inch central screen. Now, the left-hand dial is the usual Toyota hybrid power meter with its eco power and charge sections. The flanking central colour multi-informational display, meanwhile, has fuel economy, driving assist, audio and info functions. The latter is able to bring that useful energy monitor that we mentioned earlier more directly into your line of sight. We'd expected cabin storage to be a Camry strong point, and in some respects it is. The glove box and the deep lidded bin between the seats here are huge, although neither favour you with any connectivity ports, nor can the glove box be cooled. Twin uncovered cup holders sit to the left of the gear lever here, just behind the main media ports, a 12-volt socket, a USB port and an aux-in point, which sit above a small storage area, the lid of which functions as a wireless phone charger. Plus, there is a further compartment down by the driver's right knee. Not so good are the door bins, they're quite small, and the fact that Toyota has forgotten both an overhead sunglasses compartment and ticket clips for the sun visors. Right, let's have a look at the rear seat. Now, we mentioned earlier that this car is a little larger than some of its obvious segment rivals. Will that pay off back here? Let's pull back this usefully large and wide opening rear door and find out. Inside, it's as roomy and spacious as those exterior dimensions would suggest the car would be. And the bench design benefits from many of the upholstery support advantages that feature up front there. The fact that the exterior part of the roof curves downwards towards the rear of the car does make a slight difference to the headroom back here, but you would only really notice that if you were a 6-footer. And even if you are, then you'll have absolutely no complaints about the legroom. That is basically just as good as a large executive saloon like a BMW 5 Series or a Mercedes E-Class, and it's also just as good, if not better, than what you'll find in this car's Lexus ES cousin. Strangely so, given that model's extra 90mm of length. In terms of competition in the Camry's own medium-range segment, only Skoda's Superb offers more. Nice touches back here include contrast door stitching and the way that the floor carpet arches over the central transmission tunnel, which has apparently been reduced in height with this design, although not to any great extent as far as we can see. The sort of B-pillar vents that you get to supplement the central ones for extra ventilation on many rivals, they're missing, and the door bins are extremely small, but you do get twin USB ports, overhead coat hooks and reading lights, seat back pockets, Isofix child seat fastening points for the two outer seats, and here an armrest with twin cup holders. Finally, let's have a look out back, where again much is expected and much is delivered, in terms of capacity anyway. Now, there's no powered boot lid option or any outward catch to release the trunk lid, so you'll have to do that either from a switch inside the car or from the provided button on this key fob. Now, because of the design of the rear suspension and the way that the hybrid system's battery has been placed out of the way beneath the rear seat, luggage space, there's 524 litres of that, doesn't seem to have been in any way compromised by this car's electrified remit. Quite simply, Toyota is better than its rivals in packaging a hybrid drivetrain so it doesn't impinge on boot space. You can see that simply by comparing luggage capacity stats. A plug-in VW Passat hybrid has a boot that's 122 litres smaller. As for the Ford Mondeo self-charging hybrid, this Toyota's only really direct segment rival, well, that car has a boot that's a massive 141 litres smaller, with space compromised by a corpse-like battery bulge in the boot floor. Even a conventionally engined Mondeo has a boot that's only 17 litres bigger than what's being served up here. It's quite an achievement. Interestingly, this Camry's trunk space is also far bigger than that provided by its mechanically identical Lexus ES cousin. There is quite a high loading limit to negotiate when you're getting your stuff in, and there's no extra space on offer beneath the boot floor, although a temporary spare wheel is still provided. Still, the cargo area is wide and it's aided by recesses on each corner, and it seems to go back forever. 8 standard-sized carry-on suitcases will fit. That's one more than you get in a Mondeo hybrid. Tie-down points and a 12-volt socket are missing though, but you do get a couple of extending tabs inside the boot lip, and there are 2 bag hooks. And you get these catches at the top of the cargo area aperture, which can be tugged on to retract the 60-40 split rear seat back should you find yourself unable to resist the allure of flat-pack furniture. There's just one saloon body style and one 2.5 litre self-charging hybrid engine option for Camry buyers, but you do get a choice of trim levels. Design, which costs around £30,000, and this plusher XL variant, which will set you back around £1,200 more. As with all Toyota Group hybrids, there is a CVT belt-driven auto gearbox. This model will certainly be a rare sight on our roads. The brand expects to sell just 500 examples here each year. So let's position this car price-wise for you within Toyota's hybrid model lineup. It's about the same price as a base spec RAV4 mid-sized SUV or a really top-spec version of either a Prius hatch, a CHR small SUV or a Corolla hatch or estate. Also similarly priced is the brand's Prius Plus 7-seat MPV, and for only a couple of thousand more you could get the extra benefits of plug-in hybrid technology and go for a Prius plug-in. But none of these Toyota models can approach the interior passenger space that you get in the Camry or the equipment levels that are included for the money. We'll get to those after we've taken a quick look at the opposition options that this car faces in its chosen medium-range saloon segment. Obviously, for the kind of money that's being asked here, there are any number of diesel-powered Mondeo segment models on offer. But if you're interested in this Camry, then we're assuming it's because you really don't want a diesel engine in a family-sized saloon of this kind. In which case, assuming also that you don't want an SUV, your options are extremely limited. Now, Toyota has priced this contender directly against the only other self-charging hybrid model in the sector, and that's the Ford Mondeo hybrid. The two cars cost much the same and their efficiency figures are also very similar. But this Camry accelerates more readily, it's better equipped and it offers far more boot space. Surprisingly, given the Ford's ancestry, we think this Toyota handles less ponderously too. So in short, it feels like a more thoroughly developed product. But it can't be plugged in. Does that matter? Well, it might do if the low CO2 figures needed for equally low benefit-in-kind taxation are an overriding consideration in choosing a car of this kind. But you'll have to balance that against the much higher asking prices needed for the three plug-in petrol-electric hybrids that currently campaign in this segment. PHEV versions of the Skoda Superb, the Peugeot 508 and the Volkswagen Passat. All cost around £35,000 and the Passat plug-in, the GTE, will cost even more, around $36,500. That's a big premium to be able to attach your car to a power line. So we'd understand if, having taken a look around, you concluded that there's really nothing quite like a Camry, in which case you're going to need to know whether the expected generous equipment levels being promised here actually materialise. So let's see. The range kicks off with the base design model, which comes with 9-spoke 17-inch alloy wheels, full LED headlights with auto levelling, keyless smart entry, front and rear parking sensors, reversing camera, rear privacy glass, power folding mirrors with rain repellent glass, LED tail lamps, headlamp washers, metallic paint, a temporary spare wheel and an alarm. Inside, even at this level, there's leather upholstery and powered heated front seats with lumbar support. There is also a dual-zone climate control system and a rather special one which purifies the cabin with so-called nanoparticles, negatively charged ions wrapped in water molecules. And you get a 7-inch instrument cluster screen and drive mode select control, which gives you 3 selectable drive modes for the auto gearbox. Infotainment is taken care of by the Toyota Touch 2 multimedia system with voice recognition and a 7-inch screen, and that's your access point for navigation, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi connectivity, mirror-link phone capability and a 6-speaker DAB audio system. Most Camry buyers, though, are probably going to want to find the extra for the plusher XL variant that we're trying here. This version visually sets itself apart with larger 18-inch 20-spoke wheels, more sophisticated dual-beam LED headlights, LED front fog lights. There's also powered steering column adjustment, an auto-dipping rear-view mirror, a wireless charging tray, aluminium scuff plates, and some extra camera-driven safety features. We'll get to safety stuff in just a moment. And there's what Toyota Toyota calls an intelligent clearance sonar package, which uses an array of 8 front and rear sensors to detect any object close to the vehicle when you're manoeuvring at parking speeds. Now, if something is detected that you haven't seen, say a post or a low wall, an alert will sound. If that's ignored, then the brakes will automatically be applied to prevent the impact. So, plenty's included as standard then. So much, in fact, that options are few. For £320 more, you could add in the Protection Plus pack that gives you rubber floor mats, door handle protection film, a rear bumper protection plate, a boot liner and a safety kit. Those items can also be ordered separately from your dealer. And if you don't like any of the 4 standard metallic paint colours, Tyrrell Silver, Galaxy Black, Galactic Blue, or as here, Graphite, then you can pay £800 more to get a pearlescent platinum white finish. If you find the cabin ambiance a bit dark, you'll be pleased to find that beige coloured leather upholstery is a no-cost option with both trim levels. And it's not possible to order a tow bar, but that's not unusual with a hybrid. You wouldn't be able to tow anything very heavy anyway. On to safety stuff. You'd expect a spacious saloon to also go large when it comes to cutting-edge, camera-driven electronic safety features, and the Camry does, courtesy of the standard inclusion of its Toyota Safety System Pack, which includes 6 key elements based around use of a camera and a millimetre wave radar. As you'd expect in this day and age, and one of those is autonomous braking. Now, Toyota calls its setup PCS, or pre-collision system with pedestrian detection, and like all such setups, this one scans the road ahead in search of potential collision hazards as you drive, with particular emphasis on potential dangers from pavement users. If something is detected, you'll be warned. If you don't respond or you aren't able to, then the brakes will automatically be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident, slowing the car by up to 25 miles an hour. The setup operates at speeds between 6 and 112 miles an hour, or between 6 and 30 miles an hour for specific pedestrian detection, and it's been improved with increased sensitivity and dynamic range, so it can cover daytime cyclist detection and nighttime pedestrian detection too. The other 5 Toyota Safety System features can be quickly covered. Lane Departure Alert warns dozy drivers who have drifted over delineating lines on the highway, and it applies subtle steering assistance to help them back into lane. Sway Warning sounds an alert and displays a warning if steering input, lane positioning and vehicle sway suggest driver fatigue. Road Sign Assist pictures road signs on the move and displays them on the dash. And Automatic High Beam remotely dips your headlights at night. There's also full range ACC, or adaptive cruise control, which automatically keeps you a safe distance behind the car in front on the highway. ACC monitors vehicles merging in or out of your traffic lane, helping to maintain smooth acceleration and deceleration. And the system is also capable of load speed following, including stop-start driving at speeds between 0 and 25 miles an hour. Of course, safety isn't only about camera-driven tech, although you would be forgiven for thinking that these days. It is probably equally relevant to note that this 8th generation Camry model's much stiffer GAK platform and its tauter global architecture structure makes it significantly more crash-resistant than this design used to be. Impact energy is now better absorbed by the front of the body structure and dispersed along multiple paths, and a greater proportion of high-tensile steel has been used to help the body absorb severe side collision impact forces. Plus, the rear structure has been strengthened to improve rear collision performance. The upper part of the B pillars and the door panels have been redesigned to reduce the likelihood of head or back injuries against the vehicle interior. And should you ever hit a pedestrian, a clever floating island inner structure for the bonnet should reduce head injuries in that nightmare scenario. In addition, of course, there are lots of airbags. This cabin features 7 of them, not quite as many as you get in the Lexus ES, but enough for the kind of reassurance that you want. Twin front and side airbags, a driver's knee airbag, and full-length curtain shield airbags to shield from splintery glass and window intrusion. Plus, as you expect, there are features like a tyre pressure warning system, ISOFIX child anchors on the 2 outer rear seats, hill assist control, and the usual electronic assistance for traction, stability and braking. As you'll have gathered if you viewed other sections of this film, this Camry Hybrid is of the self-charging, non-plug-in kind, which is why it's so much cheaper than segment hybrid rivals who only offer plug-in technology. Just as importantly, if you're browsing in the medium range class and you're looking at, say, a decently performing diesel auto Mondeo or a Passat, you'll find this electrified petrol Camry to be hardly any more expensive, nearly as economical and far more tax efficient, all of which you would think might make this Toyota theoretically an interesting option for a private buyer or for a company manager wanting a more individual choice in the family-sized saloon sector, a car that projects the right kind of eco-minded image. The official quoted WLTP combined cycle fuel economy figure is the same whichever Camry variant you choose, rated at between 50.4 and 53.3 mpg, so you should get a decent range from the 50-litre fuel tank. We reckon an average user would spend just over £3,000 on fuel over a typical 20,000 mile annual mileage. The CO2 reading applicable to this car varies though, because the design model rides on smaller 17-inch wheels. That base model manages 98 grams per kilometre of CO2. This Plusher XL variant that rides on 18-inch rims manages 101 grams per kilometre. Those figures almost exactly replicate what you get from the only other self-charging hybrid in the segment, the Ford Mondeo hybrid, but as we've remarked elsewhere, that car is less practical and it's slower to accelerate. The plug-in models in the class, PHEV versions of the Volkswagen Passat, the Skoda Superb and the Peugeot 508 do much better than this Toyota, of course, when it comes to the official fuel and CO2 ratings, but only if you keep them fully charged up. And as we have mentioned in our market and model range section, they cost at least £5,000 more to buy in the first place. Anyway, if you wanted a plug-in, then Toyota can offer you PHEV versions of its RAV4 and its Prius. But we think this Camry Hybrid is a decent all-round package and a sensible eco-minded step away from diesel, particularly for business buyers. In terms of economy, the Camry's reading is almost exactly what you get from a comparable diesel. A Ford Mondeo 2-litre EcoBlue 190 PS Auto, for example, manages 51.4 mpg, but its CO2 reading is significantly better than any diesel car in the class, even the lowest powered ones. The most tax-efficient diesel in the class is currently a Skoda Superb 2-litre TDI 150 PS, which puts out 114 grams per kilometre of CO2, incurs a benefit-in-kind tax liability for a 40% taxpayer of 30%, and at the time of this test, in autumn 2019, incurred a 3-year BIK tax outlay of £9,445. In contrast, the Camry design model CO2 reading of 98 grams per kilometre gives it a BIK rating of just 23%, so a 3-year BIK outlay of £8,469, which means a £976 saving. If you were to choose this Toyota over, say, a 150 PS diesel version of the Volkswagen Passat or the Mazda 6, then your 3-year saving would be much more, getting on for close to £2,500, and that really does make you think. The residual values for this car also make decent reading from Toyota's point of view, no doubt aided by this car's relative rarity in the market. Taking readings from all the industry's key players into account, that's Glasses, CAP, Key Resources and Auto Futura, computes an average residual figure for this Camry of 53% after 3 years and 30,000 miles of use. That's against a competitor average of just 39%. Those strong residuals have a big impact on total cost of ownership figures. Take into account depreciation, fuel costs and all taxation, including this Toyota Hybrid's cheaper first-year road tax, and industry figures suggest that the Camry would cost £753 a month to run. The competitor average, that's £817 a month. During much of your urban motoring in this hybrid Toyota, say when you're inching along in traffic with the engine seamlessly disabled and battery power in motion, you won't be using any fuel or emitting any emissions at all. Plus, it helps in this respect that cold weather operational efficiency has been improved with the brand's more recent hybrid technology. That means that whereas previously on a chilly morning you might have seen the drive unit default straight to the petrol engine on startup, now Now it's more likely to revert to the preferable electric mode as you glide out silently into the traffic, and that's a pretty cool sensation in a car of this kind. At higher speeds in this Camry, you'll need to bear in mind that the quoted fuel figures are even more heavily dependent than normal on the driver assuming a significant degree of restraint. Certainly to get anywhere near even the 40 miles per gallon mark in day-to-day use with this hybrid, you'll have to keep the car locked into the Drive Mode Select System's Eco mode. Now that will moderate the throttle response and the engine power output while also tweaking the climate control. At highway speeds, this setting also lets you coast with the engine off, saving more fuel. Throughout all of this, you'll also need to keep a very careful eye on the hybrid system indicator, which replaces the usual rev counter on the dash, making sure that the needle stays as often as possible in either of the blue eco or charge zones. There is also an energy monitor, and that's selectable both on the center dash infotainment screen and in the instrument cluster. Now that can show you at any time what's being driven by what. You may also want to keep an eye on the useful graphical fuel consumption display, which is provided as part of the infotainment system's info section. There are trip information and history screens, so you can gauge your ongoing success in energy regeneration and fuel economy. What else might you need to know about running cost issues? Well, buyers may need reminding that petrol-electric Toyota models no longer qualify for free congestion charging, and it is possible that all this technology might make you worry about this Camry hybrid model's reliability. You really shouldn't, though. The Prius-derived engineering that's in use here scores very highly in almost every customer satisfaction survey going, and this car is covered by a 5-year, 100,000-mile warranty. This is a notable improvement on the limiting 3-year, 60,000-mile packages that you'll get from brands like Ford, Vauxhall and Volkswagen. Unlike earlier Toyota hybrid models, there is no extended warranty for the hybrid components. Early Priuses were covered for up to 8 years. However, for an extra outlay, you can guarantee the petrol-electric underpinnings for up to 11 years on an unlimited mileage deal. As standard, Camry buyers get 5 years of pan-European roadside breakdown assistance, a 3-year paint warranty and 12 years of anti-perforation cover. As for looking after your car, well, routine maintenance is needed every 10,000 miles or 12 months, depending on which comes around soonest. Now that may be a little frustrating if you're a higher mileage driver, and those stops are a lot more frequent than they would be with a comparable diesel. There's a dedicated My Toyota website that allows you to book a service online, and Toyota has a fixed price servicing plan, so you'll know in advance exactly how much any work will cost before you check into a dealer. You could also take advantage of the optional prepaid service plan that the dealer will offer you at point of purchase, and that enables Camry owners to cover the cost of routine maintenance with monthly or one-off payments in advance. However you go about paying for maintenance, on a Camry hybrid it shouldn't cost you very much. After all, there's no starter motor or alternator to go wrong, there's no drive belts to break, a maintenance-free timing chain, there's no particulate filter to get clogged up with diesel fumes, and of course, thanks to the CVT auto gearbox, there's no clutch either. The hybrid setup has a good record for minimising tyre wear, and the battery will last the life of the car. Plus, the regenerative braking setup helps to extend the life of the brake pads. Over 60,000 miles of driving, the front pads should only need replacing once, while the rear pads and all the discs will probably last the full distance. Let's finish with insurance. Now, the entry-level design model is rated at Group 31E, and this Excel version is pitched at 32E. The Camry's charms aren't difficult to identify, and they primarily centre around its hybrid engine. You might wish it was one of those electrified models of a plug-in persuasion, but then would obviously be far pricier. Aside from that, the Camry falls back on the same attributes which sold its 80s and 90s predecessors, namely the fact that it offers more space for rear seat passengers and luggage than the Mondeo segment norm, amongst saloons anyway, and it's better equipped for the money. Of course, you might be one of those afflicted by the scourge of badge snobbery, in which case you won't like this Toyota at all. It's for such folk that the Japanese conglomerate has designed this model's mechanically very similar Lexus ES cousin. Predictably, neither car has the handling polish of a good European executive saloon, but if all you really care about is comfort and refinement, that won't matter. The Camry easily matches pricier sedans in that regard, although its cabin finishing and media connectivity might disappoint, even if your comparison is with volume brands in the segment. Overall, though, we think that for the right kind of buyer, a person disillusioned with diesel and bemused by the rather pointless hordes of mid-sized SUVs currently infesting the market, this Camry could well have a distinct appeal. This person will want a comfortable, reliable, undemanding conveyance offering plenty of value and hybrid efficiency without plug-in hassle. And they'll be delighted with the refinement and the spacious rear seat and boot space that this car can offer. If these advantages pique your interest, then go right ahead and try this Toyota. Hybrid tax breaks will certainly reward you for doing that. Other rivals are more dynamic in many ways, but you might well feel that a Camry just makes more sense. Camry owners always have.